Dr. Samuel Mitchell's weathered hands froze mid-reach toward the massive black bear, his medical instincts warring with 40 years of surgical training as he stared at the softball-sized tumor protruding from her neck. The bear's amber eyes locked onto his, not with the wild fury he expected, but with something that made his breath catch, desperate, pleading recognition. A low, guttural moan escaped the animal's throat as she struggled to breathe, blood staining the golden autumn leaves beneath her swollen body. Sam's daughter Victoria would arrive with federal agents within the hour, armed with termination papers and arrest warrants. His hands trembled as he opened his emergency medical kit, knowing that what he was about to do would destroy everything: his adopted daughter's career, his own freedom, perhaps even his life. The pregnant bear's labored breathing grew shallower with each passing second. How long did they have before it was too late? And could an old man's guilt-ridden heart save 2 lives when he'd failed to save the one that mattered most? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years earlier, Dr. Samuel Mitchell had been Tennessee's most celebrated cardiac surgeon, his steady hands saving lives while his own world crumbled in a sterile hospital room. Margaret had squeezed his fingers with what little strength remained, her voice barely a whisper. "Sam, sometimes the heart needs more than medicine." Those were her last words before breast cancer claimed the woman who'd stood by him through 40 years of missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and countless nights when patience took precedence over family. His daughter Sarah had watched from the doorway, her face a mask of barely contained fury. 40 years, Dad. 40 years of you choosing everyone else's family over your own." She'd walked out that night, taking 8-year-old Emma with her, a granddaughter Sam had barely known, another casualty of his relentless dedication to healing strangers. The divorce papers from Sarah's accusations cut deeper than any scalpel: abandonment, emotional neglect, choosing career over family. She'd disappeared into the vastness of America, leaving no forwarding address, no phone number, no bridge back to the life he'd unknowingly destroyed. The great Smoky Mountains had called to him like a siren song of solitude. Here, in a weathered cabin near the park boundary, Sam sought the redemption that operating rooms could never provide. The silence was deafening, no monitors beeping, no urgent pages, no life-or-death decisions weighing on his shoulders, just the whisper of wind through ancient oaks and the distant call of wildlife that asked nothing from him except to be left alone. Victoria Ashford had been his saving grace, the 12-year-old orphan he'd adopted 20 years ago after her parents died in a car crash. Now 45 and director of the park's wildlife division, she'd grown into a woman of fierce independence and unwavering principle. Their weekly dinners were stilted affairs, conversations dancing around the elephant in the room, how Sam's pattern of emotional distance had shaped her own fear of abandonment. The park itself was struggling under federal budget cuts and increased oversight. Environmental groups pressured for expanded protection while local communities demanded economic development. Victoria walked this tightrope daily, her job hanging by threads as thin as spider silk. The Federal Review Board watched her every decision, waiting for any excuse to install someone more compliant with Washington's agenda. Recent wildlife surveys had documented alarming decline. Only 1,600 black bears remained in the Smokies ecosystem, down from historical populations of over 5,000. Each animal represented a precious thread in the delicate web of mountain ecology. Park policy was absolute: no medical intervention in natural processes. Nature must take its course, regardless of human sentiment or emotional attachment. Sam's morning ritual involved hiking the same trail where he'd planned to scatter Margaret's remaining ashes, a ceremony delayed by 3 years of cowardice. Today felt different somehow, charged with possibility and dread in equal measure. The autumn air carried whispers of coming winter, And somewhere in the golden tapestry of falling leaves, destiny waited with amber eyes and labored breathing. The small wooden box containing Margaret's ashes felt heavier than it should as Sam made his way down the familiar trail toward Cascade Creek. 3 years of carrying this burden. 3 years of searching for the perfect moment to let her go. The October morning was crisp, painting the Smoky Mountains in brilliant shades of amber and crimson that Margaret would have loved. She'd always said autumn was God's way of showing off before the long winter sleep. Sam's boots crunched through fallen leaves as he approached the secluded bend in the creek where they'd shared their first kiss 42 years ago. This was where it should happen, where their love story began, would be where her earthly journey ended. He'd rehearsed the words 1,000 times, the final goodbye that had lodged in his throat like a stone for 3 endless years. The sound reached him first, a low, guttural moan that didn't belong in this peaceful sanctuary. Sam froze, his medical instincts immediately cataloging the quality of the sound. Pain, distress, labored breathing. He set Margaret's ashes carefully on a moss-covered boulder and moved cautiously toward the source. What he found stopped his heart cold. A massive black bear lay sprawled beside the stream, her dark fur matted with sweat and blood. But it wasn't her size that made Sam's breath catch. It was the grotesque tumor protruding from her neck, easily the size of a softball, angry and inflamed. The growth pressed against her windpipe, each breath a visible struggle that sent tremors through her entire body. Sam's trained eye took in the details that painted a grim picture. The bear was pregnant, her swollen belly indicating she was close to term. Flies buzzed around the tumor's weeping edges while she panted with the shallow, rapid breathing of something in severe distress. Her amber eyes, when they found his, held an intelligence that pierced straight through his defenses. "Jesus," Sam whispered, his surgeon's mind automatically assessing what he was seeing. The tumor was clearly malignant, pressing on vital structures, restricting airflow. Without intervention, this animal had days at most, hours more likely. The bear made no move to flee or attack. Instead, she watched him with those impossibly expressive eyes, as if she understood that this weathered old man represented her only hope. Sam had seen that look before, in countless hospital rooms, on countless faces of patients who knew their time was running out. His hands shook as he pulled out his cell phone, muscle memory forcing him to call Victoria first. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Dad? You're up early even for you." "Vicky, I need emergency veterinary support at Cascade Creek. There's a bear here, pregnant, with what looks like an advanced malignant tumor. She's dying." The silence stretched so long Sam thought the call had dropped. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had turned cold as mountain stone. "Dad, you know the rules. Federal policy is absolute. No medical intervention in natural wildlife processes. I've explained this to you before. This isn't natural, Vicky. This is suffering. She's pregnant, for God's sake. There could be cubs." "Stop!" Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare use that tone with me. I have a federal oversight committee breathing down my neck, waiting for any excuse to shut down our wildlife program entirely. One violation, just one, and everything I've worked for disappears." Sam stared at the bear, watching her struggle for each breath. "What if it were a person, Vicky? What if it were Emma?" "That's not fair, and you know it. Emma is our granddaughter, not a wild animal subject to natural selection. Emma is a granddaughter I've never even met because I made the wrong choices about who mattered most." The words came out harsher than Sam intended, old wounds bleeding into new crises. Victoria's silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I could lose everything, Dad. my job, my reputation, any chance of making a real difference for wildlife conservation. The Federal Review Board is looking for any excuse to replace me with someone who'll turn this park into a tourist playground. Sam disconnected the call and immediately dialed Dr. James Cooper, the veterinarian in nearby Gatlinburg, who'd treated the farm animals when Sam first moved to the mountains. "Doc Cooper, it's Sam Mitchell. I need an emergency favor." "Sam, good to hear from you. What's going on?" "I've got a pregnant black bear with an advanced tumor. She needs immediate surgical intervention or she'll die within hours." The pause was telling. "Sam, you know I can't treat wild animals without federal permits. The liability alone would shut down my practice. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." As Sam ended the second call, the bear's breathing became more labored, each exhale a small whimper of pain. Time was running out, and the old surgeon found himself facing the same impossible choice that had defined his entire career: follow the rules or follow his conscience. Sam stared at his hands that had performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries, hands that had held beating hearts and coaxed life back into flat-lined patience. Margaret used to say they were magic hands, blessed by God to heal, but they hadn't been magic enough to save her, and they certainly weren't equipped for veterinary surgery on a wild bear. Yet, as he watched the animal's labored breathing grow more desperate, her amber eyes never leaving his face, Sam felt something shift inside his chest. It was the same feeling he'd experienced in the operating room when faced with impossible cases, the moment when training, instinct, and sheer determination crystallized into action. "I know exactly how you feel, girl," he whispered, remembering Margaret's final struggle for breath in that sterile hospital room. "Nobody should die alone." Sam's hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory overriding rational thought. His emergency hiking pack contained basic first aid supplies: gauze, antiseptic, pain relievers meant for human use, not nearly enough for major surgery, but perhaps enough to stabilize her until proper help could arrive. He jogged back to his truck, parked at the trailhead, and ransacked his emergency kit. Years of mountain living had taught him to be prepared for anything, and his medical background meant his supplies went far beyond typical camping gear. Veterinary antibiotics from when he'd helped neighboring farmers with sick cattle, a small bottle of ketamine for emergency sedation, surgical gloves that he'd never quite stopped carrying. The makeshift operating theater took shape on the flat boulder beside the stream. Sam spread his emergency blanket as a sterile field, arranged his limited instruments with the precision of a surgeon preparing for the most important case of his career. LED camping lanterns provided adequate lighting, and the sound of rushing water would mask any noise. As he prepared the ketamine injection, calculating dosage based on the bear's estimated weight, Sam's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we can find a compromise." "It's too late for compromises, Vicky." Sam's voice was steady, the calm that always settled over him before a difficult procedure. "I'm going to operate." "Dad, no, wait for me. I'm already in the truck. We can figure something out together." "There's no time. Her breathing is failing. By the time you get here with proper authorization, she'll be dead." Sam could hear the engine noise in the background, Victoria driving fast on mountain roads. "Don't do this, please. You'll destroy everything I've worked for." "Some things are more important than careers, sweetheart." The old endearment slipped out, carrying 45 years of love and regret. "I should have learned that lesson before I lost your mother." The bear made no resistance as Sam administered the sedation, her body too weak to fight even if she'd wanted to. As the ketamine took effect, her breathing eased slightly, the pain-induced tension leaving her muscles. Sam had perhaps 30 minutes before the drug wore off, 30 minutes to remove a tumor that should require a full surgical team and sterile operating room. His hands found their rhythm, the familiar dance of incision and dissection that had defined his professional life. The tumor was even worse than it had appeared from the outside, a malignant mass that had invaded surrounding tissue, pressing against the trachea and major blood vessels. In a human patient, this would be considered inoperable without extensive support equipment. But Sam had spent decades pushing the boundaries of what was possible, performing miracles in emergency situations where textbook procedures weren't options. His fingers worked by feel as much as sight, following tissue planes and blood vessels with the intuition that only came from thousands of hours in the operating room. The sound of vehicles approaching made his hands pause for just a moment. Multiple engines driving fast. Victoria had called for backup, either to stop him or help him. Sam couldn't be sure which. Car doors slammed and Victoria's voice carried through the trees. "Dad! Where are you?" "Over here," Sam called back, not looking up from his work. The tumor was partially separated now, but the most dangerous part remained, freeing it from the major blood vessels without causing fatal hemorrhaging. Victoria appeared at the edge of his makeshift operating field, flanked by two park rangers Sam recognized but didn't know well. Her face was pale, torn between professional duty and personal loyalty. "Sir, you need to step back from the animal immediately," one of the rangers said, his hand resting on his radio. "This is a federal violation." "Give me 5 more minutes," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm almost done." Victoria stared at the scene, her adoptive father performing surgery on a wild bear with camping equipment, the animal's life hanging in the balance, her own career potentially destroyed by whatever happened next. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Director Ashford, this is Supervisor Chen. We've received reports of unauthorized wildlife intervention in your sector. What's your status?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Victoria's finger hovered over the radio button while she watched Sam work with the focused intensity she remembered from his surgical days. The rangers waited for her orders, protocol demanding immediate intervention. "Dad," Victoria whispered, "I can't protect you from this. Federal investigators are already en route." Sam looked up from his work for the first time since beginning the procedure, meeting his daughter's eyes with the same calm certainty that had carried him through countless medical crises. "Then we'd better hurry," he said simply, "because I'm not leaving her to die alone." The tumor was almost free now, blood vessels clamped with improvised tools, the bear's breathing already showing signs of improvement. But federal law was federal law, and the sound of helicopters in the distance suggested that Sam's time as a free man was rapidly running out. The tumor came free with a wet, sucking sound that echoed across the quiet stream. Sam held the grotesque mass in his gloved hands, nearly 2 pounds of malignant tissue that had been slowly strangling the life from this magnificent creature. Blood welled from the surgical site, but not the catastrophic hemorrhage he'd feared. His hands moved automatically, suturing blood vessels with the precision that had made him Tennessee's most sought-after cardiac surgeon. "Jesus Christ, Dad," Victoria breathed, watching as the bear's breathing immediately became deeper, more regular. "You actually did it." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, accompanied by the distant wail of sirens on the mountain roads below. Sam worked faster, closing the incision with neat, precise stitches, while sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Sir, federal agents are inbound," Ranger Morrison said, his young face torn between admiration and duty. "ETA less than 10 minutes. Sam didn't look up from his work. "Then help me get her stable instead of just standing there." To everyone's surprise, Victoria dropped to her knees beside the makeshift operating table. "What do you need?" "Hold pressure here while I finish the closure." Sam guided her hands to a gauze pad over the incision. "Gentle but firm, just like when you used to help me bandage your scraped knees." The memory hung between them. Victoria, at age 12, brave and trusting, believing her adoptive father could fix anything. Now 45, she held the life of a wild bear in her hands while federal agents descended on them like avenging angels. "Dad, why?" Victoria's voice was barely audible above the approaching helicopters. "Why risk everything for an animal you don't even know?" Sam's hands paused in their work. "Because I couldn't save your mother. Because I've never met my granddaughter. Because I've spent my whole life choosing duty over love, and I'm tired of living with regret." The bear began to stir as the ketamine wore off, her powerful muscles twitching as consciousness returned. Sam quickly administered a lighter sedative to keep her calm, while the anesthesia fully cleared her system. "She's going to need antibiotics," Sam said, more to himself than anyone else. "Post-surgical care, monitoring for infection. I can't just dump her back in the woods." "You can't take her home either," Ranger Morrison pointed out. "Keeping wild animals is federal crime, I know." Sam's voice carried 40 years of frustration with regulations that prioritized paperwork over patient care. "So arrest me." The first helicopter touched down in the nearby meadow, disgorging federal agents in tactical gear who moved with military precision toward their location. Victoria's radio crackled with urgent demands for status updates. "Director Ashford, respond immediately." "We have federal wildlife inspectors demanding to speak with you." Victoria stared at the radio for a long moment, then deliberately switched it off. "I guess we're all criminals now." Sam looked at his adoptive daughter with surprise and profound gratitude. "Vicky, you don't have to—" "Don't call me that," she said, but without the earlier venom. "And yes, I do. You taught me that some things matter more than careers, remember?" The bear's eyes opened fully now, alert and aware. Instead of the panic Sam expected, she remained calm, even as federal agents surrounded their position with weapons drawn. Her amber gaze fixed on Sam's face with unmistakable recognition and, was it gratitude? "Federal agents, step away from the animal immediately." Inspector Harold Brennan emerged from the group of agents, his face twisted with satisfaction. Sam recognized him immediately, the son of William Brennan, a patient Sam had lost on the operating table 15 years ago. A routine cardiac procedure that had gone wrong despite Sam's best efforts, leaving a bitter family convinced that medical negligence had killed their patriarch. "Dr. Samuel Mitchell," Brennan said with cold formality, "you're under arrest for violation of the Endangered Species Act, illegal veterinary practice, and interference with federal wildlife management." "The animal was dying," Sam said simply, not moving from beside the bear. "I saved her life." "You violated federal law." Brennan's voice carried years of suppressed rage. "Just like you violated your oath when you killed my father with your arrogance." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Victoria stepped forward, positioning herself between Brennan and her father. "Inspector, this is neither the time nor the place for personal vendettas." "Personal?" Brennan laughed bitterly. "This is about a pattern of behavior, a God complex that puts Dr. Mitchell's judgment above the law, above protocols designed to protect both animals and humans." Sam's hands remained steady on the bear's flank, monitoring her vital signs even as federal agents prepared to arrest him. "Your father had a massive myocardial infarction. I did everything humanly possible to save him. You experimented on him, used an untested procedure because you thought you knew better than established cardiac protocols." The truth of it hit Sam like a physical blow. William Brennan had been dying when he reached the operating room. Massive heart attack, multiple vessel blockages, less than 5% chance of survival with conventional surgery. Sam had attempted an innovative arterial bypass technique that might have given the man a fighting chance. It had failed. They almost always did, which was why such procedures remained experimental. But Sam had been young enough to believe that surgical skill could overcome impossible odds, arrogant enough to think that saving one life justified risking professional consequences. "I was trying to save him," Sam said quietly, "just like I'm trying to save her. And look how that turned out." Brennan gestured at the bear, now fully conscious and watching their confrontation with intelligent eyes. "You've created a dangerous precedent, wild animals learning to depend on humans for medical care, breaking down the natural barriers that keep both species safe." The bear made a soft, huffing sound, almost like a sigh. She struggled to lift her massive head, looking directly at Sam with those impossibly expressive amber eyes. Then, in a gesture that silenced every human present, she gently pressed her muzzle against Sam's outstretched hand. "Son of a bitch," Ranger Morrison whispered. Even Brennan stepped backward, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Wild black bears simply didn't behave this way around humans. The interaction violated every assumption about predator-prey relationships, about the fundamental distance that should exist between wild animals and human civilization. Victoria pulled out her phone and began recording. "If you're going to arrest him, Inspector, you'd better have your facts straight. Because what I'm seeing here isn't criminal behavior, it's a miracle." The bear remained calm as federal agents closed in, but her eyes never left Sam's face. She seemed to understand that these humans posed a threat to the man who had saved her life, and her body tensed with protective instincts that defied every textbook on wildlife behavior. "Dad," Victoria said urgently, "look at her vitals, heart rate, respiratory function." The surgery didn't just remove the tumor, it gave her back her life. Sam checked the bear's pulse, noted the strong, steady rhythm that replaced the earlier arrhythmia caused by oxygen deprivation. Her breathing was deep and regular, no longer the shallow panting of an animal in respiratory distress. "She's stable," Sam announced, as much for the federal agents as for his own peace of mind. "Full recovery expected within 6 to 8 weeks. "Recovery?" Brennan's voice rose to near shouting. "Dr. Mitchell, you've performed unauthorized surgery on a federal protected species using unsterile equipment in a non-clinical environment. The animal should be euthanized immediately to prevent infection and suffering." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. After everything, the successful surgery, the bear's obvious improvement, the miraculous moment of interspecies connection, bureaucracy still demanded death as the safest, most legally defensible option. "Over my dead body," Sam said quietly, and meant it. The bear seemed to sense the shift in tension, her powerful muscles bunching as if preparing to defend the human who had saved her life. Federal agents fingered their weapons nervously, suddenly aware that they were dealing with a 300-pound predator who had just demonstrated unprecedented loyalty to a human being. Victoria stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Inspector Brennan, I'm Director of Wildlife Management for this park. Until a federal judge rules otherwise, this animal remains under my jurisdiction, and I'm ordering her immediate transfer to our rehabilitation facility for post-surgical monitoring." "Director Ashford, you're exceeding your authority." "No, Inspector, you are." The helicopter rotors continued their rhythmic beating overhead, while sirens wailed from multiple directions as more federal agents converged on their location. The bear watched it all with calm intelligence, as if she understood that her fate, and Sam's, hung in the balance of human politics and legal technicalities. The federal courthouse in Knoxville had never seen anything like it. By 7 a.m., protesters lined the sidewalks 3 deep, holding signs reading, "Save Hope and Sam," and "Medical miracles aren't crimes." Local news trucks competed for parking spaces with federal law enforcement vehicles, their satellite dishes reaching toward an overcast November sky like electronic prayers. Inside the sterile courtroom, Sam sat at the defendant's table wearing his best suit, the same one he'd worn to Margaret's funeral 3 years ago. His hands, steady as granite during the most complex cardiac procedures, trembled slightly as he watched Federal Prosecutor Janet Walsh arrange her files with military precision. Hope, the name had stuck after local media picked up the story, lay sedated in a specialized transport cage at the back of the courtroom. Judge Patricia Hensley had made the unprecedented decision to allow the bearer's presence, ruling that the court needed to observe the subject of the controversy firsthand. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Walsh began, her voice cutting through the packed gallery's whispers, "the defendant's actions, however well-intentioned, represent a dangerous precedent that threatens the very foundation of federal wildlife management. We cannot allow emotions to override decades of scientific policy." Sam's court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named Marcus Chen, looked nervous as he shuffled through his notes. Sam had declined private counsel, partly from stubbornness and partly because he'd already spent his savings on medical equipment for Hope's recovery. "The prosecution will demonstrate," Walsh continued, "that Dr. Mitchell's unauthorized surgery violated multiple federal statutes, endangered both human and animal safety, and set a precedent that could undermine conservation efforts nationwide." In the gallery, Victoria sat rigid with tension, flanked by park rangers who'd testified on Sam's behalf during the preliminary hearings. Her career hung in the balance alongside her father's freedom. Federal investigators had already recommended her termination for failure to prevent the incident. Inspector Brennan took the witness stand with the satisfaction of a man who'd waited 15 years for justice. His testimony was methodical, damning, and entirely accurate from a legal standpoint. Dr. Mitchell performed unauthorized veterinary surgery on a protected species using non-sterile equipment in a wilderness setting, Brennan stated. The animal should have been euthanized according to federal protocol to prevent suffering and maintain proper wildlife management boundaries. In your professional opinion, Inspector Brennan, what danger does this precedent pose? Prosecutor Walsh prompted. It encourages dangerous interaction between humans and wild predators. It teaches animals to seek human intervention rather than maintaining natural behaviors. Most critically, it undermines federal authority to manage protected species according to scientific principles rather than emotional impulses. Sam's attorney rose for cross-examination, sweat visible on his forehead. Inspector Brennan, isn't it true that you have a personal grudge against Dr. Mitchell stemming from your father's death 15 years ago? The objection came swift and sustained, but the seed was planted. Brennan's face flushed red, his professional composure cracking slightly. My personal history is irrelevant to Dr. Mitchell's criminal violations, Brennan said through gritted teeth. Is it? Chen pressed. When did you first learn about this bear's condition, Inspector? I received notification of the incident approximately 6 hours after it occurred. And how quickly did you mobilize federal resources to arrest Dr. Mitchell? Federal wildlife violations require immediate response. You deployed helicopters, tactical teams, and federal marshals within hours to arrest a 67-year-old retired surgeon who saved an animal's life. Does that response seem proportionate, Inspector? The courtroom gallery murmured approval until Judge Hensley's gavel restored order. Hope stirred in her cage, the sound apparently familiar enough to trigger some recognition. Her amber eyes opened, immediately seeking and finding Sam's face across the crowded room. What happened next stopped all proceedings cold. Hope began making soft, huffing sounds, the vocalizations bears typically reserved for their cubs. She pressed against the front of her cage, not with the frantic energy of a trapped animal, but with the focused attention of a creature trying to communicate with someone specific. Your Honor, Prosecutor Walsh said urgently, The animal's behavior demonstrates exactly why human-wildlife interaction is dangerous. This bear has formed an inappropriate attachment. Hope's next action silenced the prosecutor mid-sentence. The bear carefully extended one massive paw through the cage bars, flexing her claws in what any animal behaviorist would recognize as a gesture of invitation rather than aggression. Sam felt tears sting his eyes as he recognized the behavior. Margaret had rescued an injured owl years ago, nursing it back to health in their garage. When they'd finally released it, the bird had perched on Margaret's shoulder for nearly an hour, preening her hair in a gesture of pure gratitude. "Objection, Your Honor," Chen said, finding his voice. "The prosecution is asking this court to criminalize compassion." Judge Hensley studied Hope for a long moment, watching the bear's focused attention on Sam. "Inspector Brennan, in your expert opinion, does this animal appear to be suffering or traumatized by her interaction with the defendant?" Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the animal's current condition is irrelevant to the legal violations. Answer the question, Inspector. Does this bear appear to be suffering?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Hope had settled into a relaxed position, her breathing steady and unlabored, her eyes alert but calm. The surgical site showed clear signs of healthy healing, with no evidence of infection or complications. "No, Your Honor." "The animal appears healthy." "More than healthy," Chen interjected. "Dr. Mitchell's surgery saved this bear's life and the lives of her unborn cubs. The prosecution wants to criminalize a medical miracle." "Cubs?" Judge Hensley leaned forward. "I wasn't informed that the animal was pregnant." Dr. Amanda Foster, the veterinarian who'd been monitoring Hope's recovery, stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, if I may, ultrasound imaging confirms the bear is approximately 7 months pregnant with twins. Without Dr. Mitchell's intervention, we would have lost 3 lives, not 1. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Prosecutor Walsh looked like she'd been slapped, shuffling frantically through her files for information that wasn't there. "Your Honor," Walsh said desperately, "the pregnancy status doesn't change the legal facts." Federal law prohibits unauthorized medical intervention regardless of outcome. Judge Hensley studied the case files for several long minutes while the packed courtroom waited in tense silence. Hope had closed her eyes but remained oriented toward Sam, her presence a living testament to the complexity of the issues at hand. "Dr. Mitchell," Judge Hensley said finally, "please stand." Sam rose on unsteady legs, feeling every one of his 67 years. This was it, the moment when 40 years of healing would be weighed against 10 minutes of breaking federal law. "You stand accused of serious federal violations. The law is clear, and ignorance is not a defense. However," Judge Hensley paused, looking directly at Hope, "this court has never dealt with a case where the alleged victim appears to be not only unharmed but demonstrably grateful for the defendant's actions." The judge turned to Prosecutor Walsh. "Counselor, what would the government accept as appropriate resolution?" Walsh straightened, sensing victory within reach. "Full prosecution, Your Honor. Federal law exists to prevent exactly this type of vigilante intervention. We recommend the maximum penalty, 5 years federal prison and $250,000 in fines." The gallery exploded in angry shouts until Judge Hensley's gavel restored order. Victoria had gone pale, understanding that her father faced spending his final years in federal prison. "And the defense recommendation?" Judge Hensley asked. Chen looked at Sam, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, Dr. Mitchell requests permission to address the court directly." Sam stood slowly, his surgeon's hand steady now as he faced the judge who would determine his fate. In the transport cage, Hope had opened her eyes again, watching him with the same trusting expression she'd worn during those terrifying moments beside Cascade Creek. "Your Honor," Sam began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of 4 decades in operating rooms, "I've spent my life trying to heal what's broken. Sometimes that meant following protocols. Sometimes it meant breaking them. I can't apologize for saving a life, even if that life belongs to a bear who'll never pay taxes or vote or contribute to society in ways our laws recognize." The courtroom held its collective breath as Sam continued, his words carrying the weight of accumulated regret and hard-won wisdom. "But I can promise this court that I understand the consequences of my actions, and I'm prepared to accept whatever judgment you deem appropriate." Judge Hensley nodded slowly, then delivered the words that would change everything. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. on November 4th, piercing through Sam's restless sleep like a surgical blade. He'd been dreaming of Margaret again, her final moments in the hospital, the way her breath had grown shallow and labored just like Hope's had been beside the creek. The ringing dragged him back to his empty cabin, where federal monitoring equipment blinked red in the darkness. "Is this Dr. Samuel Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, strained with exhaustion and something else. Desperation. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Dr. Rebecca Torres at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I'm calling about your daughter, Sarah Mitchell Reynolds. She's listed you as emergency contact." Sam's blood turned to ice water. "Sarah? I don't understand. We haven't spoken in 3 years." "Sir, your daughter was admitted 4 hours ago in critical condition. She's been diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. The disease has progressed rapidly and Dr. Mitchell, she's been asking for you." The words hit Sam like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Sarah, his Sarah, dying of the same disease that had claimed Margaret. The cruel symmetry of it felt like divine punishment for every missed dinner, every broken promise, every time he'd chosen strangers over family. "How long?" Sam's surgeon's training took over, demanding clinical facts even as his heart shattered. "Without aggressive treatment, possibly weeks. With treatment, the prognosis is still very poor. She refused to let us contact you earlier, but her condition deteriorated tonight." Sam was already reaching for his clothes with one hand, the phone pressed to his ear with the other. "I'm in Tennessee. I can be there in 4 hours. Dr. Mitchell, there's something else. She has a daughter with her, Emma, 8 years old. The child has been staying with a family friend, but with Sarah's condition, Emma, his granddaughter." The little girl he'd never met, who was about to lose her mother the same way Victoria had lost her parents 20 years ago. The cycle of loss and abandonment that had defined his family was about to claim another generation. "I'm coming," Sam said, his voice hollow. "Tell Sarah I'm coming." As he drove through the dark Tennessee mountains toward Nashville, Sam's mind raced between his dying daughter and the bear he'd promised to protect. Hope was recovering well at the wildlife rehabilitation facility, her surgery site healing cleanly, her cubs developing normally. Victoria visited daily, monitoring her progress and documenting every detail for the ongoing federal investigation. But now Sarah was dying, and Sam faced the same impossible choice that had defined his entire life: duty to one patient versus obligation to another, professional responsibility versus family bonds. This time, however, the stakes weren't just medical. They were existential. The hospital corridors felt like walking through a nightmare. Sam's legs moved automatically while his mind reeled with the implications of Sarah's illness. How long had she known? Why hadn't she called sooner? And most importantly, why had she listed him as emergency contact if she'd spent 3 years refusing all communication? Room 4C looked exactly like the room where Margaret had died. Same sterile walls, same mechanical breathing sounds, same smell of disinfectant fighting a losing battle against human mortality. But instead of his wife in the hospital bed, Sam found his daughter, 42 years old and already bearing the hollow-eyed look of advanced cancer. Sarah was awake, staring at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard stare Sam remembered from his worst surgical cases. When she heard his footsteps, she turned her head slowly, and their eyes met for the first time in 3 years. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried years of accumulated pain and, surprisingly, relief. "Sarah." Sam approached the bed like he was walking through a minefield, unsure of his welcome despite the phone call. "Why didn't you tell me?" A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips, turning into a coughing fit that left blood specks on the tissue she pressed to her mouth. "Tell you what? That I was going to die the same way Mom did? That despite all your medical expertise, you couldn't save either of us?" The accusation landed with surgical precision, finding every vulnerable spot in Sam's defenses. He'd known this moment would come eventually, the reckoning for 40 years of choosing medicine over family, patience over personal relationships. "Sarah, I didn't call you because I couldn't bear to watch you fail again." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't stand to see that look on your face when you realized that all your surgical skills, all your medical knowledge, couldn't fix your own family." Sam pulled a chair close to the bed, his hands shaking as he reached for his daughter's fingers. They felt cold, papery, like Margaret's had in those final days. "I failed your mother," Sam said quietly. "I failed you. I spent so many years trying to save other people's families that I forgot to take care of my own." "You saved that bear." Sarah's voice held no accusation, just quiet observation. "I saw it on the news. 67 years old, performing surgery in the wilderness with camping equipment. You risked everything for an animal you didn't even know." Sam looked up in surprise. "You've been following the story?" "I've been following you, Dad, for the past 6 months, ever since my diagnosis. I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on you to see if you were okay living alone in those mountains." Sarah's smile was sad and knowing. "When I saw what you did for that bear, I finally understood." "Understood what?" "That you didn't choose patients over family because you didn't love us. You chose them because you loved us too much. You were so terrified of losing us that you threw yourself into saving everyone else as if that could somehow protect us from mortality." The words hit Sam like a revelation, stripping away decades of self-recrimination and guilt. Sarah had seen through to the truth he'd never been able to admit to himself, that his obsession with healing had been driven not by professional arrogance, but by the desperate need to prove that death could be defeated. "The bear was dying," Sam said simply. "She reminded me of your mother in those final moments. I couldn't walk away." "I know. And that's why I called you tonight." "Because I realized that I've been doing the same thing, pushing you away because I was terrified of watching you watch me die." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A small figure appeared in the doorway. A girl with Sam's eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin, clutching a worn stuffed elephant. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "The nurse said there was someone here to see you." Sarah held out her hand to the child. "Emma, sweetheart, I want you to meet someone very special. This is your grandfather, my daddy." Emma approached cautiously, studying Sam with the frank curiosity of childhood. "You're really my grandpa. Mom has pictures of you, but they're really old." Sam felt his heart break and heal simultaneously as he looked at his granddaughter for the first time. 8 years old, the same age Victoria had been when he'd adopted her, the same age Sarah had been when she'd started competing for his attention with cardiac patients. "Yes, sweetheart." "I'm your grandpa, and I'm very sorry it took me so long to meet you." 3 days into Sarah's hospitalization, Sam discovered the research notebooks hidden in her overnight bag. Leather-bound journals filled with meticulous handwriting, sketches of wildlife, and data tables that made his breath catch in his throat. Sarah hadn't just been following his story about hope. She'd been conducting her own research into the bear's condition for months. "You're a wildlife biologist," Sam said, sitting beside Sarah's hospital bed as she dozed fitfully between morphine doses. The revelation had hit him like a physical blow. His daughter, whom he'd assumed worked in some anonymous office job, was actually Dr. Sarah Mitchell Reynolds, Ph.D. in wildlife biology from UC Berkeley. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her father's face. "Took you long enough to figure that out, Dad. Though I suppose you were distracted by the whole dying thing." "Sarah, these notebooks. You've been studying bears in the Smokies for over a year." Hope, specifically. Sam held up pages of detailed observations, photographs, GPS coordinates tracking the bear's movements through the park. Hope was part of my doctoral research on environmental stressors affecting wildlife reproduction in protected habitats. Sarah's voice was weak but steady. "I've been documenting her behavior, her territory patterns, her interactions with other bears. When I saw that tumor developing, I knew she was going to die." The implications crashed over Sam like an avalanche. "You were planning to intervene medically." "I was planning to recommend euthanasia to park management." Sarah's confession came out in a whisper. "Prolonged suffering serves no conservation purpose, and a sick bear poses risks to the ecosystem. It would have been the scientifically appropriate decision." Sam stared at his daughter, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The woman he'd dismissed as someone who'd turned her back on intellectual pursuits had actually followed in his footsteps, choosing a career dedicated to healing, just on a different scale. "But then you showed up and did something impossible," Sarah continued. "You performed surgery that shouldn't have worked, on a patient who shouldn't have survived, using equipment that shouldn't have been adequate. And somehow, you saved her." "We saved her," Sam corrected gently. "Your research provided the baseline data that made the surgery possible. I knew where to cut because I understood her anatomy. But I understood her anatomy because you'd been studying her species for years." Sarah turned her head toward the window where November rain streaked the glass like tears. "I came to Tennessee to reconcile with you, Dad. Not because I was dying. I didn't know about the cancer then. I came because watching you save Hope made me realize that we're more alike than I ever wanted to admit." The door opened softly, and Victoria entered carrying coffee and a manila envelope marked "Urgent, Federal Eyes Only." Her face was grim, the expression Sam recognized from their worst family crises. "Dad, we need to talk. Both of you." Victoria pulled a chair close to the bed, her official park director demeanor cracking to reveal the frightened daughter underneath. "Sarah, I know you probably don't remember me very well. I remember you perfectly, Victoria." Sarah's smile was warm despite her pain. "You were 12 when Dad adopted you. I was 17 and convinced he loved you more than me because you needed him more." Victoria's composure broke completely. "Oh, Sarah, I never meant to come between you and Dad. I was just a scared kid who deserved a family just as much as I did." Sarah reached out weakly, grasping Victoria's hand. "I spent years resenting you for something that wasn't your fault. Dad had enough love for both of us. I was just too selfish to see it." Sam watched his daughters, biological and adopted, healing wounds that had festered for decades, and felt something shift in his chest. Margaret had been right. Sometimes the heart needed more than medicine. Sometimes it needed forgiveness. "What's in the envelope, Vicky?" Sam asked, though he dreaded the answer. Victoria's expression hardened back into professional mode. DNA analysis results from Hope's tumor tissue. The federal investigation demanded extensive testing to determine if environmental factors contributed to her condition. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out pages of laboratory results dense with scientific terminology. As she read, her face went white. "This can't be right," Victoria whispered. "Sarah, you need to see this." Sarah struggled to sit up higher in bed, her scientific curiosity overriding her physical weakness. She scanned the documents with the rapid comprehension of someone trained to interpret complex data. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. "Dad, do you understand what this means?" Sam looked between his daughters, feeling the familiar frustration of being excluded from a conversation happening in a professional language he didn't fully speak. "The tumor contains human genetic markers," Victoria explained, her voice hollow with shock. "Specifically, markers consistent with experimental pharmaceutical compounds designed for human cancer treatment." The room fell silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of Sarah's heart monitor. Sam's medical training began connecting dots that formed a picture too horrifying to accept. "Someone has been using wild animals as test subjects for human cancer drugs," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as her scientific outrage overrode her physical pain. "Hope wasn't suffering from natural cancer, Dad. She was suffering from induced cancer, deliberately created for experimental purposes." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window as she processed the implications. "If this is true, we're not dealing with a simple wildlife management issue. We're dealing with corporate crime on a massive scale." Sam felt the room spinning around him. The bear he'd risked everything to save hadn't been a victim of natural disease but of human greed and scientific malfeasance. The tumor he'd removed from her throat had been deliberately inflicted by people who viewed wild animals as expendable research materials. "Who would do this?" Sam asked, though part of him already knew the answer would destroy whatever faith he had left in human nature. Sarah was reading through more documents, her expression growing more horrified with each page. The genetic markers match compounds developed by Meridian Pharmaceuticals. They've been conducting illegal trials in protected wildlife areas across 3 states. "Meridian Pharmaceuticals," Victoria repeated slowly. "Dad, Inspector Brennan's supervisor, Regional Director Coleman, used to work for Meridian before joining Federal Wildlife Services 5 years ago." The conspiracy began taking shape with terrifying clarity. Federal officials compromised by pharmaceutical money, wild animals used as disposable test subjects, and anyone who discovered the truth discredited or prosecuted. "That's why Brennan came after you so aggressively," Victoria continued, her voice rising with anger. "They needed to discredit your intervention and destroy any evidence of Hope's true condition. A heroic rescue story draws attention. A criminal prosecution buries the truth." Sam looked at his dying daughter and realized that the choice between Hope and Sarah had never been a choice at all. They were both victims of the same systemic corruption that valued profit over life, efficiency over compassion. "Sarah," Sam said quietly, "how long have you known about this?" Sarah met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd been carrying a terrible secret. "I started suspecting 3 months ago when I found 2 other bears with similar tumors in unnatural locations. When I tried to report it through proper channels, my research funding was cut, and I was told to focus on more conventional wildlife management issues." "You came to Tennessee to investigate Meridian's operations," Victoria said, understanding dawning in her voice. "I came to Tennessee to expose them. But then I got sick and I realized I was running out of time. When Dad saved Hope, he inadvertently provided the evidence I needed to prove what Meridian has been doing." Sam felt the weight of revelation settling on his shoulders. His decision to operate on Hope hadn't just saved one bear's life. It had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened wildlife across multiple states. And now his daughter, the investigator who could expose the truth, was dying of the same disease that had been deliberately inflicted on countless animals. "We have to tell someone," Sam said. "The media, other federal agencies, someone who can stop this." Victoria shook her head grimly. "Dad, Inspector Brennan is scheduled to have Hope euthanized tomorrow morning. Official cause, preventing the spread of infectious cancer to wild populations. Once she's dead, there's no physical evidence of Meridian's experiments." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, pain etching lines across her face. "Then we need to get her out of there." Tonight. Sam stared at his daughter in amazement. Even dying, even facing the end of her own life, Sarah was still fighting to protect the animals she'd dedicated her career to studying. "Sarah, you can barely sit up. You can't possibly—" "I can't physically rescue Hope," Sarah interrupted. "But I can provide you with everything you need to expose Meridian's operation. My research, my contacts, my evidence. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "I know people at the Washington Post environmental desk. If we can get Hope to safety and provide documentation of the pharmaceutical testing, this story will explode nationwide." Sam looked between his daughters, one biological, one adopted, one dying, one fighting to save her career. Both united in their determination to protect an animal who had become a symbol of something larger than any of them had initially understood. "What do you need me to do?" Sam asked, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was asking the right question. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Facility stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness of November 12th, its security lights casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Sam's hands trembled as he cut the fence behind the main building, bolt cutters making soft clicks that seemed impossibly loud in the mountain stillness. At 77, breaking and entering wasn't exactly in his skill set, but desperation had a way of teaching new tricks. Victoria emerged from the shadows carrying a tranquilizer gun and transport cage. "Security guard makes his rounds every 2 hours. We have 43 minutes before he comes back." "And if we're caught?" Sam whispered, though he already knew the answer. "Federal prison for both of us. But Hope dies tomorrow morning regardless, so we're really just choosing our own fate at this point." They moved through the facility with the careful precision of a surgical team. Victoria's master key opened the holding area where Hope lay sleeping in her enclosure, her surgical scar now just a thin line of pink beneath her dark fur. The bear's breathing was deep and regular, her pregnancy clearly visible in the gentle rise and fall of her swollen belly. "She's beautiful," Sam whispered, watching Hope sleep peacefully for the first time since that desperate day beside Cascade Creek. "She's evidence," Victoria corrected, but her voice was soft with affection. "The only living proof of what Meridian Pharmaceuticals has been doing to wildlife across 3 states. As they prepared the transport cage, Sam's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Package delivered to Wash Post Environmental Desk. Photos, DNA results, financial records linking Coleman to Meridian. Story goes live at 6 a.m. regardless of what happens tonight." Hope stirred as they approached her enclosure, amber eyes opening to focus immediately on Sam's face. Instead of the panic he expected, she made the same soft, huffing sounds she'd produced in the courtroom. Recognition, greeting, trust. "Hello, girl," Sam murmured, extending his hand through the chain link. Hope pressed her massive muzzle against his palm, a gesture of intimacy that still amazed him after weeks of recovery. The tranquilizer took effect quickly, and they loaded Hope's unconscious form into the transport cage with the gentle efficiency of medical professionals. At 380 pounds pregnant, she was dead weight that tested both their aging backs, but adrenaline and desperation provided strength they didn't know they possessed. "Where exactly are we taking her?" Sam asked as they wheeled the cage toward Victoria's Park Service truck. "Sarah's research cabin. It's off the books, technically outside park boundaries and equipped with everything we need to monitor her condition until the story breaks." The drive through winding mountain roads felt endless, every set of headlights potentially federal agents coming to stop them. Hope remained sedated but stable, her vital signs strong despite the stress of transport. Sam rode in the back with her, one hand resting on her flank, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat and the occasional movement of cubs shifting within her womb. Sarah's research cabin sat hidden in a grove of ancient oaks, solar panels and satellite dish indicating serious scientific equipment within. Victoria had obviously been preparing this sanctuary for days, stocking it with medical supplies, monitoring equipment, and enough food to sustain both human and bear occupants for weeks if necessary. They transferred Hope to a specially constructed enclosure that Sarah had designed for close-contact wildlife research. Spacious enough for comfort, secure enough for safety, and equipped with cameras that could document every moment of her continued recovery. "Now we wait," Victoria said, checking her watch. 3 hours until Sarah's story goes live. If we can keep Hope safe until then, the whole world will know what Meridian has been doing. Sam settled into a camp chair beside Hope's enclosure, exhaustion finally catching up with his 77-year-old body. The bear was beginning to stir from the tranquilizer, her eyes blinking slowly as consciousness returned. "Dad," Victoria said quietly, "I need you to know something. When all this is over, when the investigation is complete and the publicity dies down, I'm resigning from the Park Service." Sam looked up in surprise. "Vicky, you've worked your whole career. My whole career has been built on a system that allows pharmaceutical companies to torture wild animals for profit. I can't be part of that anymore." Victoria's voice was steady, resolved. "I'm going to work with Sarah's research foundation, assuming she—" The words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy between them. At 5:47 a.m., Sam's phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, news alerts flooding in as Sarah's story hit the digital world like a bombshell. The headlines were damning: pharmaceutical giant accused of illegal wildlife testing, and federal officials implicated in corporate cover-up, and hero surgeon uncovers animal testing conspiracy. Victoria's radio crackled to life with urgent chatter as federal agents discovered Hope's disappearance. Inspector Brennan's voice was tight with barely controlled rage as he coordinated search efforts across the park. "All units, be advised we have a missing protected animal and 2 suspects considered armed and dangerous. Dr. Samuel Mitchell and Director Victoria Ashford are wanted for federal crimes including theft of government property and obstruction of justice." Sam laughed, despite their desperate situation. "Armed and dangerous? I can barely walk upstairs without getting winded." Hope had fully awakened now, moving around her enclosure with the careful grace of a heavily pregnant female. She showed no signs of distress from the transport, and her appetite remained strong as she investigated the food Victoria had provided. At 6:32 a.m., Sam's phone rang with an unknown number that made his heart race. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Janet Walsh, the federal prosecutor from your case. I need to speak with you immediately about new developments in the Meridian investigation." "I'm listening," Sam said cautiously. "Based on evidence provided by your daughter, a federal grand jury has been convened to investigate Meridian Pharmaceuticals and their alleged conspiracy with federal wildlife officials. Inspector Brennan has been suspended pending investigation, and Regional Director Coleman is in federal custody." Sam felt the weight of months lifting from his shoulders. What does this mean for Hope? It means the euthanization order has been rescinded pending completion of the investigation. "Dr. Mitchell, where is the bear? We need to ensure her safety until this matter is resolved." Sam looked at Hope, peacefully grooming herself in the morning sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. After everything they'd been through together, the desperate surgery, the federal prosecution, the corporate conspiracy, She deserved to live out her pregnancy in peace. "She's safe," Sam said simply. "And she's going to stay that way." Within hours, the cabin was surrounded by media vehicles, federal investigators, and wildlife advocates demanding access to the bear that had become a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. But Sam and Victoria maintained their vigil, protecting Hope from the chaos her rescue had unleashed upon the world. As the sun set on November 12th, Hope gave birth to healthy twin cubs in the sanctuary Sarah's research had provided. The birth was captured on cameras that would soon broadcast the miracle of new life, triumphing over human corruption to millions of viewers worldwide. Hope had become more than a bear. She had become hope itself. 6 months later, on a warm May morning that painted the Smoky Mountains in shades of emerald and gold, Sam Mitchell stood beside Sarah's hospital bed, watching his daughter hold her newborn granddaughter for the first time. The experimental treatment had worked, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to give Sarah precious months she'd never expected to have. "She has your eyes, Dad," Sarah whispered, adjusting baby Margaret Rose in her arms. The name had been Emma's suggestion, honoring both the grandmother she'd never met and the hope that had carried their family through its darkest period. Emma, now 9 and wise beyond her years, sat cross-legged on the hospital bed beside her mother. "Mom, when can we go see Hope and her babies again?" "Soon, sweetheart, very soon." The Cascade Creek Wildlife Sanctuary had become a symbol of what was possible when science, compassion, and stubborn determination converged. Built on land donated by anonymous benefactors, actually Margaret's life insurance money that Sam had never been able to bring himself to spend, the facility housed Hope and her now 6-month-old cubs, Courage and Faith, in a natural habitat that allowed for both protection and freedom. Victoria had indeed resigned from federal service, throwing herself into sanctuary management with the passion of someone who'd found her true calling. The pharmaceutical conspiracy prosecutions had made her a hero in conservation circles, but she seemed most proud of the small moments, watching Hope teach her cubs to fish, documenting their play behaviors, seeing wild instincts flourish in safety. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice growing serious, "there's something I need to tell you about the sanctuary funding." Sam looked up from where he'd been studying his infant granddaughter's perfect fingers. "What about it?" The anonymous donors weren't so anonymous. The Washington Post story generated over $3 million in donations from people around the world who were moved by Hope's story. But the largest single contribution came from an unexpected source. Victoria entered the hospital room carrying coffee and wearing the expression Sam had learned to associate with significant news. "Dad, you're going to want to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting." Inspector Brennan made a personal donation of $500,000 to the sanctuary. It turns out his hatred of you wasn't just about his father's death. He'd been secretly investigating Meridian's wildlife testing program for 2 years. His aggressive prosecution was designed to draw media attention to the case. The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. Harold Brennan, the man he'd assumed was driven by personal vendetta, had actually been working to expose the same corruption that had nearly destroyed them all. "He used me," Sam said slowly, understanding dawning. "Made me into a symbol of resistance against federal overreach, knowing it would generate publicity for Hope's case. He risked his career to gather evidence against his own supervisor," Victoria continued. "Coleman had been threatening Brennan's family if he didn't cooperate with the cover-up. When you operated on Hope and created a media circus, it gave Brennan the opening he needed to go public with what he'd discovered." Sarah shifted baby Margaret Rose to her shoulder, the infant's peaceful breathing a counterpoint to the emotional revelations filling the room. "Dad, every person in this story was trying to save someone they loved. You were trying to save Hope, because you couldn't save Mom. I was trying to expose Tumor-Ridden because I couldn't bear to watch more animals suffer. Victoria risked her career because she couldn't abandon family. Even Brennan was protecting his children by taking down the people who threatened them. Sam looked around the hospital room at his assembled family. Biological daughter, adopted daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter, and felt the pieces of his fractured life finally clicking into place. Margaret's death had taught him that healing required more than surgical skill. Sarah's illness had taught him that love sometimes meant letting go. Hope's rescue had taught him that some choices transcended law and logic. "There's one more thing," Victoria said, pulling an official-looking document from her briefcase. "The Federal Wildlife Service has offered you a position as special consultant for wildlife medical emergencies. Apparently, they've decided that sometimes the rules need to be broken by people who understand the consequences." Sam laughed, a sound that held 40 years of accumulated irony. "They want to hire me to do legally what I was willing to go to prison for doing illegally? The position comes with federal authority to intervene in wildlife medical emergencies, a team of veterinary specialists, and a mobile surgical unit equipped for field operations. You'd be based here in Tennessee with jurisdiction across the entire southeastern region." Emma looked up from her new baby sister with the practical curiosity of childhood. "Grandpa, does this mean you'll be like a doctor for animals now instead of people?" "Something like that, sweetheart. Will you still have time to teach me how to help sick animals?" Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma had spent the past months volunteering at the sanctuary, showing the same instinctive compassion for creatures in need that had driven his own career in medicine. Watching her gentle interaction with Hope's cubs, he saw the possibility of family traditions that honored life rather than being consumed by the fear of losing it. "We'll work together," Sam promised. "You, me, Aunt Victoria, and your mom. The whole family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not the bitter tears of resentment that had defined their relationship for years, but the cleansing tears of reconciliation and hope. "Dad, I want you to know that everything that happened, the estrangement, the anger, even the cancer, it was all worth it if it led us to this moment. Don't say that, sweetheart. The pain you've suffered was necessary to break us all down enough to rebuild something better. We're not the same family we were 3 years ago, Dad. We're stronger because we've learned to choose love over fear." As if summoned by the mention of family bonds, Sam's phone buzzed with a video message from the sanctuary. The footage showed Hope and her cubs playing in the morning sunlight, the bear family healthy and thriving in their protected habitat. Hope had grown into a magnificent mother, teaching courage and faith the skills they'd need to survive, while somehow maintaining the gentle trust she'd developed with her human caretakers. "She's getting ready to return to the wild," Victoria explained, watching the video over Sam's shoulder. "The cubs are old enough now to survive independently, and Hope has shown no signs of dependence on human care. Within the next month, we'll open the sanctuary boundaries and allow them to choose their own territory." Sam studied Hope's image on his phone screen, remembering that desperate moment beside Cascade Creek when her amber eyes had looked into his with such profound trust. The circle was completing itself. The wild creature he'd saved was ready to return to wildness, carrying with her the offspring that represented continuation and hope. "Will we still be able to see her?" Emma asked, the question carrying childhood's reluctance to accept that love sometimes meant letting go. "We'll see her whenever she chooses to let us see her," Sam replied. "But she belongs in the forest, not in a cage, no matter how comfortable we try to make it." Baby Margaret Rose stirred in Sarah's arms, her tiny fist reaching toward the phone screen showing Hope's family. 4 generations of humans and 2 generations of bears, all connected by a moment of desperate compassion that had grown into something larger than any of them had imagined possible. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "what do you think Mom would say about all this?" Sam considered the question seriously, remembering Margaret's final words about hearts needing more than medicine. I think she'd say that sometimes the best way to heal a broken heart is to let it break completely, so it can be rebuilt with room for more love than you thought possible. Outside the hospital window, spring was transforming the Tennessee mountains into a symphony of green growth and new beginnings. Hope and her cubs would soon join that ancient cycle of wildness and freedom, while the human family that had saved them would continue their own journey of healing and connection. The bear who had cried in pain had become the catalyst for a love that transcended species, law, and even death itself. Have you ever had a moment when saving someone else actually saved yourself? The story of Dr. Mitchell and Hope reminds us that true healing often requires breaking the rules our hearts know are wrong. At 67, Sam discovered that it's never too late to choose love over fear, family over duty, and compassion over convention. Sometimes the most broken among us, whether human or animal, become the very ones who teach us how to live again. When we open our hearts to healing others, we often find our own deepest wounds finally beginning to mend. What rules have you broken in your life to follow your heart? Share a moment when caring for someone else, family, friend, or even a pet, helped heal something broken inside yourself.